Hello, and welcome to award-winning Joan Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland. I'm doing a wee bit of a voiceover because Joe's going to do a little interview of some folk that we actually met here who've got a bit of an interesting story to tell. So we've got Duddingston Loch.
So we're just under Arthur's Seat here at the beautiful Duddingston Loch. You would never imagine we're in the middle of the city. And we've come across three young ladies here who come from different parts of the country, from different parts of the United Kingdom. And they're all first-year students at Edinburgh University. And I'm just going to do a couple of questions about them because it's a difficult time for students here in the UK, especially during the lockdown period. So I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions. Where are you from and your name? Okay, so keep us socially distancing as we always do. So just the first one here.
Hi, I'm Georgie and I'm from London.
What part of London?
South East London.
South East
Near
London.
Greenwich.
Yeah, and what are you studying here at Edinburgh University?
Politics.
Politics.
Yeah.
And are you enjoying Edinburgh?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it.
And did you come to Edinburgh before? Or
Yeah, I know it quite well. So
Okay.
It's quite nice to come
Okay.
back.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm from Chichester.
And what are you studying, Emily?
History and Spanish.
Okay, hola, ¿qué tal?
Muy bien, gracias.
So you all share in the same place, or so
Yeah.
you're all in the same accommodation?
Yeah.
You're all in the same accommodation, yeah? Okay. And what do you think of Edinburgh?
It's just a beautiful city. It feels so like homely. It's small, but obviously there's places to go as well.
And you managed to get out and about during lockdown to discover parts of the city you probably would never discovered before?
Yeah, we're really going exploring, going on a lot of walks because obviously we don't have much else to do. So it's just good to get out.
Exactly. And the last one here.
Hello, I'm Sarah and I'm from near Glasgow.
How close to Glasgow?
Like 20 minutes. I'm in Renfrewshire.
Renfrewshire,
Yeah.
okay. And what are you studying?
I'm studying psychology.
Okay. And why did you choose Edinburgh over Glasgow?
So I felt like I knew Glasgow quite well. I'd worked in Glasgow for a bit, and also, I mean, it's my nearest city, so I go there a lot. And Edinburgh, I just felt it was perfect distance away from home. Feels like a new place, and so much countryside in a city, as well as being very central. So yeah.
And so you're all best buddies now. You got best friends forever now. You're at Edinburgh University.
Of course.
And are you looking forward to the lockdown being lifted quite soon?
Can't wait. So excited.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Just to be able to do things, go out for dinner, go out and do things with your friends that you've met.
Yeah.
And
Go out.
yeah, instead of, walks are lovely.
Go to a nightclub. Go to a pub.
Clubbing.
Yeah.
Go clubbing. Go to a bar.
Yeah.
Exactly. Have a drink.
Do student things.
Exactly.
Well, thanks very much, ladies. Just a coincidence to bump into you here. We're glad we try and interview people in the various places we go to. And thanks for hanging around and thanks for giving your wee story to us. So say hello to everybody. We've got people from the United States, Canada, France, Buenos Aires.
Hola.
And if you want to watch yourselves, you can see the recorded version on Facebook on Piping Scott Tours. Okay, and you'll see the tour with Joe and I. So.
Can't wait. It's very exciting. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much and muchas gracias. Bye-bye.
Best. Bye.
Adios.
Bye.
So that was just nice to bump into a couple of students from the university there, get some local, I'd like to get local people involved. We're going to talk a wee bit more now about Duddingston itself. It's one of the most, again, you're in the middle of the city, but you're in quite a historic, very historic little village here in the middle of the city. We'll start to discuss the loch itself. The loch sits right under Arthur's Seat. So Arthur's Seat is an extinct volcano in the middle of the city. And the whole city is more or less built around the Arthur Seat itself. Now, there's archaeological evidence of life taking place up on Arthur Seat itself. They've got terraces where the ancient peoples were doing their growing agriculture, and they know that goes back to at least 4,000 years. In the loch itself, back in the 1700s, they did some dredging and they found broken weapons and broken tools that got back to the Bronze Age as well. So this is giving you an idea as to how old the civilizations were here in this part of the country. The people that lived here that we got good history from are the old Pictish tribes. We've mentioned before when we were last week, we were in Chorus, we mentioned a bit about the Pictish people, and we're going to maybe talk a wee bit more about the Pictish people, but also most of the stuff we're going to talk about goes back to the 1100s, so we're talking about just over the Norman invasion, so just after 1066 when the Normans invaded England. The influence came back up here, grew up here, up to Scotland, and we're going to take you into the most famous little kirk here, Duddingston Kirk, and we're going to talk about some of the characters. So we'll do some dedications to the people who very kindly contributed to us when we're up in the kirk. And I want to mention a few things about the loch itself, because the loch has got some great connotations here with artists. The artist Reverend is quite famous, Scottish artist Reverend, and he did one of the most famous pictures of the Reverend of the church. His name was Reverend Walker, and I think Mike may be able to pick this one up. This is one of the most famous. So this is the skating minister.
Just fold it down a wee bit, see if I can just... There we
And
go.
so,
There we go. Yeah.
and this was painted by Rayburn. Rayburn was a friend of the kirk minister here, and we visit the gardens, as did Turner. Both were friends here, and they would come do some paintings here. So this is hanging in the National Galleries of Scotland, and a very famous character. You may have even received a Christmas card, because it's always very popular at Christmas time to have the skating minister.
It's a bit like Mona Lisa, isn't it? It's like you go into the National Gallery of Scotland, you'll see mugs and you'll see tea towels and you'll see prints, and it's quite a distinctive painting, yeah.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's a really good analogy there, like the Mona Lisa. It's everywhere. It's one of the national treasures.
But of course the Glaswegians would disagree, because you've got the Salvador Dali.
Well, of course.
Christ, St. John on the cross, which is iconic, of course.
But that's a Spanish artist, not
I know.
a Scottish artist. Also in this loch is famous because this is where the rules of curling were drawn up. You know the curling where they do it on the ice? Well, this is where it all got formalised. This would freeze over regularly over the winter time. And there is a little hut here where they keep the old curling stones, so there's a curling museum. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we don't get access to it, so we can't take you in there. There are some great rules here, though. Everybody had to bring their own stones, and some of the stones are around about 80 kilograms, so that can tell you how thick the ice is. And there was penalties. If you swore, you were fined old threepence or threepence, 3 old pennies. If you brought up politics, you were fined 6 old pence. And in good gentlemanly behaviour, the winners had to buy the losers drinks in the pub. So I think that sums up quite nicely. And here we got here, the whole area is a nature reserve. You can see the swans and the geese. They're permanent residents here. And the whole area is known as a triple SI. So it's a site of scientific interest here, a special site of scientific interest. So you're not allowed to build fires, you're not allowed to camp, you're not allowed to do anything here, but you can come and it's open to everybody, and you can come and enjoy. Especially this time of the year when all the birds are coming in. We've got the moorhens, we've got the geese, we've got the swans. And of course every swan in the United Kingdom is owned by
Her Majesty.
Her Majesty.
Yeah.
So you're not allowed to kill swans, which is, I think, is quite nice. Now the name of the town is Duddingston. Now Duddingston actually goes back to the Norman invasion. There was a Norman knight called Doddy, and so this was Doddy's town. The land was given to Doddy, or Dodin, his name was Dodin, Doddin. The land was given to Dodin by the monks. And the monks came up to the border areas under the reign of David I. Now, David I was the son of Queen Margaret. We talked about Queen Margaret before and everything she did for Christianity in this country. She started off the ferry, so we get the Queen's Ferry. And her son was just as pious. And he went on a major campaign of building abbeys all along the border area. That's the English and Scottish border on the Scottish side. He was known as a king that almost broke the country through his piety. And so the monks of Kelso, which is a border town, owned the lands here. And they owned the lands at Holyrood. at Haldane Palace, this is before the palace was built, they actually built an abbey. And the monks owned the land.
Just Joe, just a comment on the crowns on the top of these lamps. It's because it's a royal park.
This is Royal Park.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's officially a royal park. So you go in there, that's royal grounds in there. And you're not allowed to trade in there. There's certain rules and regulations. As I say, you're not allowed to camp. But it is a royal park, and it's closed. The roads are closed on Sundays to allow walkers and cyclists.
Oh,
To allow walkers and cyclists access without fear of any cars. And again, as I say, there's no trading at all. So going back to the monks who owned all the land here, they gave the land, or sold the land, to Dodin, and from Dodin, you get the name Dudding. So Duddingston is Doddy's Toon in Scots. And there we get the derivation of the name. It's got lots of royal connections. We're going to talk a little bit more. It's got supposedly the oldest pub in Scotland, and we're going to talk about that.
supposedly, yeah, that's.
You have to say
There are
that.
a few that claim to
There's
be
a few in
that, yeah.
Glasgow that claim it as well. But so I think everywhere in Scotland's got the closest
Yeah.
pub, the oldest pub. But we're going to take you into the churchyard first.
Right, first of all, I'd like to show you this contraption here. This is what we call a louping stone. Louping stone, and if you notice the steps going up, now this would be where the farmers would come to church on horseback, and it was a case of the ladies when they were going back on horseback after the church service, the ladies would actually go up this little staircase to get onto their horses. The gentleman would help them up, so that is why this is here, 17th century. It goes back to the louping stone, it's called, Louping.
And louping is Scots for jump.
Yeah, it's another of these great words.
Another one of our great onomatopoeic words that we have in our language.
Now here is what we call the jugs. Jougs. And this is a punishment device here where people would be chained up. Do you think this would go around somebody's neck? It would go around their neck, and they would get a bit of humiliation in the old Scots way, a minor punishment. Okay.
And the Presbyterians love their punishment. We've all suffered
that's
from
the
corporal
jugs.
punishment. Yeah.
And that goes back to the 17th century as well, yeah, after the Reformation. And it's quite a church. It is the oldest still in use church in Scotland. It always claimed to be that because it goes back to about 1124, 12th century. As Joe was saying, the area was connected with the Dodin family, Norman. I want to explain the architecture of the church because it's quite complicated in a way. If you notice this side here, which is the south side, this is the oldest part of the church. And if you take away the tower, just forget about that tower, and you take away some of the fancy pointed buttresses that you would talk about up the top there, pointing skyward, and you look to this body of the church here, the taller bit and the lower down bit. Now this was all the church was. Going back to 12th century, it was very small and basic, and this bit on this side here, called the chancel, and this was the east facing part of the church where all the holy relics would be, and where the priest, whoever it was, would be saying their thing, and any relics that were of great value, maybe saints, artifacts or whatever, would be in this part here, and the congregation would be on this side. Now it was simply a nave and a chancel. no aisles, but later in the 17th century it was added to, and there is a northern part to the building which has an additional aisle and balcony, and of course later on too they put another tower, which dates kind of to the 17th century, the tower there, but there's other bits been added in the 19th century by our friend architect Robert Rowand Anderson, who is known for various architectural buildings at the university and so on. He was a very full-on, well-known architect, so he got his hands on this church to restore it and make it safe also. Now we're going to walk along to this doorway, and this was the original doorway, the south door where the congregation would enter normally, and it's what we call Norman or Romanesque. It hasn't got the pointed arch that is associated with Gothic or Northern Europe. This is more French inspired architecture with the curvature. So that's called Norman. And also there's some beautiful incised decoration which we call chevron markings, where you can see zigzag patterns in the stone here also. And don't miss this here, because this is all 12th century. Can you believe that? That is astounding. This is an ancient crucified Christ here, very much worn down. And if you were whatever 9 centuries old, I think you would be showing it a bit that worse for wear, like this little image is. Further down, there is what we think is a knight and a monster. We don't know quite the significance. It's quite difficult to see because it's been weathered so much, but there's a man, and if you turn the corner, this knight has got a sword in his hand. See that little sword just round the corner there? Now this would have been highly decorated, but of course time has taken its toll here. So this church then, Presbyterian church, is going
But it was Catholic to begin with, so it survived the Reformation.
Yeah.
One of the few that survived.
Yes. It's a Presbyterian church today. Still, you can see the old stonework. It's quite easy sometimes to identify this when you look at the more chiselled stonework. This was stones that were more found stones, because you're going back to 12th century, they wouldn't be able to have machinery and so on to raise and quarry stone from deep down. It would be mainly what was picked up from nearer the surface. So you've got this more kind of uneven surface here.
Because somebody had just said if the walls could talk. Well, indeed, that's what we want to give you. We want to bring it alive to you. So we'd like to bring out either characters that we know of, or we researched, or we've heard of, but also famous people who've been associated with this. Yeah,
one of the strong characters associated with here was the Reverend John Thomson. He was around at the end of the 18th, early 19th century. He was from Ayrshire. His father was a minister as well, and he came to Duddingston. Now he had also trained a bit as an artist, and I was getting painting lessons from Alexander Naismith, who's been mentioned before, and he was able to supplement his stipend, his income, by being an artist, and a very good artist he was as well. And he did a lot of landscape painting outside, which was in its infancy, going and sketching and painting outside, and he knew such people as William Mallard Turner, famous English artist, and he came and visited, Turner did, here with Thompson, and Thompson had a little studio down beside Duddingston Loch, and it was called Duddingston Tower, been designed by William Playfair, and was also the kind of headquarters of the Curling Society that we were talking about earlier. And when Turner was there, he said, "My God, sir, I envy you that view of that beautiful loch." So he was right in the same wavelength as the likes of Turner. So he was also a friend of Sir Walter Scott, and by the way, Sir Walter Scott was an elder here. He was an appointed elder at this church here also. So he was with the great and the good. And there was a saying that is connected with John Thomson, because John Thomson's first wife died. He had 5 children, and after she died, he married again, and he had there was 5 children by his not by his second wife, but his wife had a family before. So altogether, he had 10 children. And when people used to remark on this big family, he used to say, "Aye, but they're all Jock Thompson's bairns." Okay.
You're going to have to translate that one, Mike.
There's an old saying, my mother used to say that, and it's an engaging kind of saying to mean that we're all the same, we're all of the same family, we're all, no matter from different countries, from different ethnic groups, religious groups, everybody is the same. We're all human beings, and we should be maybe more aware of that in the times we live in. So
it's all about humanity.
It's about humanity.
And it's about Jock Thompson is Scottish for John Thomson, and bairn is Scottish for child. So we're all John Thomson's children, so we're all equal, and it's a message out to the world about humanity, which goes back to the stuff we're talking about Robert Burns and how Scots are levellers and how nobody's above you, nobody's below you.
That's right. It's very very inclusive. Hear the dog barking. Now, you see immediately this tomb says Isabella Ramsay, but she was a wife of John Thomson, and you see the dates there. He is commemorated by this flat slab here at the top. This is all to do with him. Now, there's a lot of moss, and it's worn down quite a lot because it's facing the sky, but he is interred here, as well as his wife and daughter. But he had another daughter who was Isabella, named after his wife, and Isabella happened to marry another artist. Yeah, it was Robert Scott Lauder. Robert Scott Lauder, and if you think back to some of our earlier tours, you might remember we were down in Silver Mills, and the house of Robert Scott Lauder's father was there because he was a merchant. So they were all very much connected. And he went away with his wife, did John Thomson, to tour Europe, to do the grand tour. So they were quite sophisticated people. Now I've got this story to tell. This monument, and the inscription around the side is very worn down, but this monument goes back to the 18th century, and interred here is Patrick Haldane. Patrick Haldane. Now, if you're familiar with the Gleneagles area of Perthshire, they were an ancient, well-established family connected with estates at Gleneagles, and Patrick Haldane, he moved down here to become involved in legal practice. He was also a minister, and he was also a member of Parliament, so he was a very highly thought of, important person. But he was the grandfather to another character, and this character was called Captain John Haldane. And Captain John Haldane was involved in the British East India Company, and they used to go between here and India quite a lot, trading. And on one occasion he set off on his ship to India, and he met this lady. Now, I may tell you first of all about this lady, who was called Anne Cargill, or Anne Brown as she was known before, and she was one of the most beautiful people, and she was known through her acting. She was also an opera singer, and she played Titania in Shakespeare too. And I've got this wonderful portrait of Anne Cargill. This is going back to the 18th century, and she was highly admired. But she liked a good life, and she had many relationships. She was a coal miner's daughter who made really good, a huge celebrity. And anyway, she happened to go off to India, And she was performing in India. She was an absolute sensation there. And William Pitt the Younger didn't really like the fact that an actress or a singer was getting so much focus.
A fine line between being an actress and being a woman of ill repute.
Yeah, it was a terrible... She had a bit of a reputation with certain men who were probably not that innocent in lots of ways themselves. An actress should not be defiling the pure shores of India.
Bless.
So that was the end of her performances, the end of her gigs in Bombay.
She got drummed out of Bombay.
She did. She had to leave very quickly. Now, she happened to leave in the same ship as Captain John Haldane. Now, John Haldane's ship, which she'd left on from Britain, was called the Fairford. And it was a very reputable trading, big sailing ship. But when they were loading in Bombay, the ship caught fire and was destroyed. And he had to come back to Britain on another packet. Now, a mail packet, it would normally be for bringing mail. It's a much smaller ship. And on that very same ship was Anne Cargill. And she was having a relationship with John Haldane, Anne Cargill, and they had an illegitimate child. And tragedy, when it was coming nearly home, it was wrecked off the Scilly Isles. There was a huge storm. And here you can see an image of that catastrophe. Now, Captain John Haldane was the grandson, the illegitimate grandson of Sir Patrick Haldane, who this monument was dedicated to, and it was also funded by John Haldane. This is the ship called the Nancy, and it was shipwrecked off Gilston Rock, close to the Scilly Isles. Now, in that terrible, catastrophic weather, the passengers took to a boat, a small boat, and unfortunately that wasn't a great thing to do. And I've got another picture I'm going to show you here. You can get it unclipped here. Oh. Here it is. And there is Anne Cargill clutching her baby and just about to be overcome by the swell of the ocean, and every single one of them died and were drowned. So there was a great outpouring of grief because she had been a huge celebrity, a common person who had made good, but there had been a lot of stuff which you had to battle against. And this is by Gilray. And Gilray was a well-known artist who made social commentaries. So this again is a romantic feel to it. It's all about the strength of the elements against us as being very vulnerable human beings. So there's a bit different messages here. So this is the end of that ship, and it's also the end of Captain John Haldane and his mistress, his lover, Anne Cargill. Now this church has got a connection also. We'll maybe get a better view of it, with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Now, a lady called Joan Caffrey, she was a singer, a performer, and she was born in Duddingston, and she performed. She was on stage in Glasgow. Now, it happened to be in Glasgow where Allan Pinkerton was, and as a young man, as a child, he used to go and watch this lady perform. He would sit with his grandmother in the front seat, and he was just astounded by the beauty of her and engagement of her. And he would dress up in his best clothing and sit and watch her. And he got to the stage where he was actually taking her home. And then it all went on from there. Now, Allan Pinkerton was what we call an abolitionist. He was also a Chartist. He was somebody who believed in social reform here in Scotland. And for that very reason, he was under the view of the authorities. he, on the day of his marriage, was being chased by the police. He managed to get married to Joan Caffrey by the skin of his teeth, and by the skin of their teeth they were able to escape, get on a boat and get to Canada. And the boat was wrecked. Oh, I know.
Yeah, again.
Another wreck. But they lost all their luggage, but they were able to survive. And then they got to America, to Chicago. And he wasn't intending to be a detective, but by the people he tended to engage with, he realized there was certain bad goings on in his area. So he realized there was a plot against Abraham Lincoln, an assassination plot. And he had been with the people plotting this, and he was able to tell Abraham Lincoln not to, or be very careful going through Baltimore on his way to his inauguration, because there was an assassination plot there. And what they did was, instead of going through Baltimore during the day, they did it during the night, thanks to Allan Pinkerton. Allan Pinkerton, who married Joan Caffrey. And he was lauded by Lincoln, and it was the early beginnings of the Secret Service and the FBI, those people who would look after the president. And the Pinkerton Detective Agency came into being, and you may be familiar with it. It is connected with the all-seeing eye, private eye, all of that business. And but it wasn't all good, because his connections. Okay, he was an abolitionist. He took to Abraham Lincoln, but he also put down trade union uprisings, connected with Andrew Carnegie, our famous Andrew Carnegie, who was a strike breaker and who brought in Pinkerton to put down the strike. One of the biggest failings of Pinkerton too was not being able to catch Jesse James. And you may know the story of that, but I'm not going to go into any detail. But what I'm going to do here is to show you this picture of Allan Pinkerton and Joan Caffrey. They were also known as being great folklorists and wanted to publish many of the traditional songs of Scotland. And I think when you see some of the pictures of these people going back, and this is going back into the 1850s, they look grim and sad and restrained, but I feel they're just about to smile. There's just something about this couple I just thought they're meant to be. They look like an engaging couple to me.
They look quite severe as well.
So there you go.
I would like to get on the wrong side of them.
Yeah. So the connection then with Joan Caffrey is there's a memorial window to Joan here in Duddingston Church, because this is where she came from, and that was put in by her daughter because strong Scottish connections with the United States, of course.
And again, from the small village here, now I'm going to mention a few more from this tiny, tiny little village. I mean, there cannot be any more, even now, any more than 200 people living in this tiny little village in the middle of the city of Edinburgh.
That's right. It's a great place. The sun's coming out just now. It's a wonderful churchyard. You can really enjoy walking around here, even if you're not interested in the history of the graves and the characters. It's just a beautiful, picturesque spot, beloved by artists and photographers, and you name it, they're all here. Okay, so I'm going to shortly pass over to Joe.
Hi everybody, it's Joe here. It's a bit of a breezy afternoon. Now I'm just going to continue a little bit story on the graveyard itself, because if Mike wants to come up to this stone here, a couple of stones here, I hope you can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up, that'd be great. And it's this family stone that I've discovered here. And if you notice it, there is a chain. Now this is not very common. In fact, this is the only one I've ever seen. But won't be able to read it too clearly. But it's a Proudfoot. His name is Thomas Proudfoot, and he was says it's baker, and he died here in 1854. But down here, it's got all of the children. Not all of them, but a lot of the children. One died 5 months old, one died 11 months old, one was 3 months old, one was 4 years, one was 6 weeks. It's a lot of child mortality going down in this family. However, On the other side, you get the stone erected by his brother, William Proudfoot. And so obviously William was witnessing what was happening to his brother here. So when they got the stones erected, when the families erected the stones, they actually chained them together, and I thought it was quite a nice romantic little family touch there. The other side that I want to point out here is this modern, looks like a castle. Now this is one of the tower houses. Now, we have mentioned these tower houses before, because the tower houses were built because of the body stealers, of the grave robbers. And I mentioned before that Edinburgh University was one of the most advanced universities in the world with regards to medicine. The reason being is that they had a good supply of corpses. The surgeons had to supply their own corpses, and so they would employ the grave robbers. And there's a story that goes here that one surgeon brought his digger with him, and they came along here, and they had noticed in the obituary in the newspaper that a burial had taken place. So they went in, they dug up the coffin, opened up the coffin, and as they opened up the coffin, the corpse sneezed. So the young woman who was buried was actually buried alive. She was probably in a coma of some sort, but she sneezed when they opened up the coffin, maybe the fresh air coming in. And of course, the hightailed it. It said that the guy who was digging it up actually ran and swam across the loch, the Duddingston Loch, to get away from it. But it's one of these little stories here that's continued here in Duddingston of the night of the corpse that sneezed. But these were built here. These little castles were built in cemeteries, graveyards, all throughout Edinburgh to prevent the body steals. And all came to an end in the 1830s when they introduced an act of government where they made it illegal to. It was always was illegal, just never considered. There was never an act of parliament against it.
Would that be the 19th century, that building, Joe?
Yeah,
do you think?
1800s.
Yeah. Okay.
So another addition to this, so we've got history going back from the 1100s under King David I, right up to the 1800s here, of course, and then through here there's access through to these beautiful gardens that we can't get into today. But there was a couple of doctors called Dr. Neil's, Mr. and Mrs. Dr. Neil. Both of them were doctors here in Edinburgh, and they lived in this little village here, and they built these beautiful gardens which they've now donated to Duddingston Conservation Society. And we would love to take you in there. We actually did ask them if they could someone would come and give us an interview and give us a guided tour, but unfortunately they're not open they're only open for very short hours during this period of COVID. But let's walk on.
There's another wee story I didn't actually tell was about John Thomson, and he had the studio which he called Edinburgh beside Duddingston Loch. So if there was people came to visit him in Duddingston, and he didn't really want to go and meet with them, he would say to tell his wife that he was in Edinburgh. And of course that was a bit of a white lie, but he was a reverend. But he was only human, of course.
Human after
I
all.
like that story.
But sticking on the story of Jock Thompson or Jock Thomson, we've got these sculpted benches here, and we've got some little poetry goes here. And the fire made the seat beside the water, and you can see the geese here, and a little duck there as well. But the other monument to Jock Thomson here is this one here in the wall, which I quite like here. And it continues on there. We said, fire made the seat beside the water. Here it says, under the seat beside the water makes a home for all of Jock Thomson's bairns. So we're all Jock Thomson's bairns, and he's got his name up here. The artist, Jock Thomson, Reverend John Thomson, the artist, 1805 to 1840. We've got Scots of Midlothian, and the Bronze Age settlement, 800 BC, so it's got all the connections. It's got the curling club rules, 1803, so this little plaque is just giving you the walking history of Duddingston. Because there's also another connection here with Walter Scott, because Walter Scott was ordained an elder of this kirk, so he was an elder of the kirk, and he spent time in the manse. Over the wall here has got the manse gardens, and it was here that he started to pen the Heart of Midlothian. And in the Heart of Midlothian, the main character, Effie Deans, meets a kind minister who gives him money, and I'm sure he's writing about Jock Thomson as well. Again, there's all these connections.
Yeah, there's another connection there, a family connection, because Robert Scott Lauder, being the son-in-law of John Thomson, who did a lot of illustrations for Sir Walter Scott's novels, including Heart of Midlothian. So it was all interlinked, yeah.
Well, I think there's another connection. I don't think it's the church, just the church that pulled them in. I think there's another little monument we want to show you here, which has got lots of royal connections.
Yeah.
But when you're here in Duddingston, you can, when you're in Edinburgh, if you get the opportunity, if you can break, if you're on an official tour, you want to break off from an official tour, just get a taxi, take you to Duddingston Kirk and have a little walk around. Come along into the village. Because along with having an 12th century church there, go back to the Norman period, we've also got what is reputed to be the oldest pub in Scotland, and it's called the Sheep Heid. Locally, people call it the Sheep's Head, but officially it's the Sheep Heid Inn. Sheep Heid, Heid is a Scottish word for head. So we're talking about the Sheep Head. And it's called the Sheep Head. Well, I'll go into that story in a minute. I'll go a little bit further back, because look here, it's established in 1360. So we talked about the church being established under the reign of David I. David I was the son of Queen Margaret. This pub was established under the reign of David II. Now, David II was the son of Robert the Bruce. So 1360, remember the Battle of Bannockburn took place in 1314. So you can do the math and say that it's just not long after the Battle of Bannockburn.
Margie's saying that she's been in here, in the pub.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's a lovely pub.
It's beautiful, yeah.
When I first came up to Edinburgh, we interviewed those kids from Edinburgh University. When I first came up to Edinburgh University, my residency is less than half a mile from here, and there's a tunnel, that's an old railway tunnel. So we used to cycle down through the old railway tunnel, come down here. I was a member of the CAMRA. Remember the CAMRA, the campaign for real ale? Do you remember that, Mike?
Oh yes, I do. Yeah.
So this is one of the real ale pubs in here. And so we used to meet, our society used to meet in here once a month. And it was always very safe to have a couple of pints, or more than a couple of pints, because you could cycle back safely through the old innocent railway line, which was disused, but you didn't have to take the main road or the roads. You could just cycle past whatever state of inebriation you were in. You got back safely to your dorms. So we're talking about 1360 being established under David II. Now this place here, we are almost equidistant from Craigmillar Castle, and we've talked about Craigmillar Castle before. It's on one of our tours. You can check out Craigmillar. And so halfway between Craigmillar and Holyrood Palace. So this takes us up to the reign of Mary Queen of Scots. We've got a car coming in here.
This just shows you how inconvenient it is with cars, doesn't it? It was never designed for having cars.
For carriages mainly, and horses.
Carriages, yeah.
And so Mary Queen of Scots is reputed to have stayed here as well. Not stayed here, but actually dined here, and would come to the pub. And this because it's right between the two palaces, so Craigmillar Castle and Holyrood Palace. Now, James VI, her son, also visited here, and we know this because this is where we get the name Sheep Heid. James VI gave the proprietor a snuff box, and on the snuff box was a ram's head or a sheep's head. And that's where we get the name Sheep's Head. So we've got the royal connections here. Set up camp here before the Battle of Prestonpans. Bonnie Prince Charlie set up camp. I'm going to take you to his house as well. So we've got nearly all the Stuarts, you know, from Queen Mary right through to Bonnie Prince Charlie, who all would have frequented this place, along with Walter Scott, along with Robert Louis Stevenson, would have stayed here as well. So you've got literary connections and royal connections in this tiny, tiny little place. Now I want to take you around into the village itself. Now historically this place was quite an industrial little village. It was a weaver village, so the people would weave here. There was a train service that was not very far from here called the Innocent Railway Line, and it was called the Innocent Railway Line on the basis that it didn't use steam. Although it carried coal, the railway line was carried by horses and mules. So it was called the Innocent Railway Line, and the tunnel to the Innocent Railway Line still exists today, and it's part of the national cycling route. But coal was important here. They would weave a certain cloth here, which is specific to the Duddingston Village, and also salt was important industries here as well. In fact, here the I'm going to take you through a little bit of the gardens and show you some of the houses.
It's called
So
the Causeway, yeah. This bit, I believe, is called the Causeway.
This is the Causeway. So again, reputed here. Oh, I'll point out also, behind here, they've also got an old skittle alley. So the skittles, before 10-pin bowling, they would play skittles here, and it's reputed that Mary Queen of Scots played skittles in here as well. The skittle alleys still exist. You can book into them, so you can enjoy a pint, a pie. You can have, it's a really nice bistro restaurant here as well, and you can also go in and see the old original skittle yards as well.
And the skittles don't put themselves back,
Is this one of the youngest residents of Duddingston coming home?
Yeah.
This is the youngest resident. There's a baby, just a new
The
baby.
baby got in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the skittles, they don't put themselves back, do they? You've got to go and put
You
them
got to go
back
and pin
up
them, yeah,
again.
you've got to have a pin
You
man
have
to go and
walk
pin them up again.
back
Yeah.
up and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of this community here, they really look after. There's a civic pride in here. Now, remember, we're just on the slopes of Arthur's Seat, and some of the land here has been given over to the community here, and so it's community land owned and managed by the local community. Everybody can access it. You go in there, you can buy new plants. There's a little plant nursery up here. You can buy your plants, and there's beautiful gardens to sit in, and there's an orchard that's on the slope of the Arthur's Seat, and also this is an access up to. There's another loch up on top of Arthur's Seat, and this gives you good access up there. It's maintained by the community, and one of the people who used to maintain it is another literary connection here, is Compton Mckenzie. You may have heard of Compton Mckenzie. We'll walk along this with Mike. Compton Mckenzie wrote, he was quite a prolific, he was actually born in England, but he adopted Scotland as his home. And he would write, he's a prolific writer, but he's also best known for that great book, Whiskey Galore. If you've never seen Whiskey Galore, the movie, I would highly recommend it. It's so funny. It plays the English against the Gaelic speakers. It is irreverent. It's snubbing the thumb, or cocking the snook to authority. And it's really, again, about levelling off the people here. If you haven't seen Whiskey Galore, you may have seen something on television called Monarch of the Glen, because Compton Mckenzie also wrote Monarch of the Glen. Compton Mckenzie was a founding member of the Duddingston Conservation Society, because he lived here as well. So he was the one that established the Conservation Society. When Mckenzie died, all of his paperwork was bought over by the University of Texas at Austin. So at the library there, you can go and check out all the papers on Compton Mckenzie. Quite a prolific writer. He was also very political, and he was a radical. And he was one of the early members of the Scottish National Party as well. So he changed his politics, or he went more radical, as he grew older, and he started to establish the Scottish National Party here as well. Some gorgeous houses here, and gorgeous gardens. I don't know if you can get a wee sneak preview up there, Mike, but absolutely beautiful. These houses are stunning. When you see a high wall, you know there's something special behind it. Now, one of the other characters I'm going to talk about here, which we like to uncover characters because I think it brings it to life, and his name is James Tytler. Now, James Tytler, I'm going to give you some of his labels. He was an apothecary. So James Tytler was, firstly, he was a doctor. He was an apothecary. He was a radical. He was an encyclopedist. So he wrote for the Encyclopedia Britannica. He was a bigamist. A balloonist. He was everything, and he is such character. He was born further up north, and in an area known as the Mearns. So that's where you come from, Mike, isn't it? You come from the Mearns.
Well, I've got a place up in Angus, which is just a bit further down, I suppose, yeah.
So further up East Coast, he went up to Aberdeen University, and he went up there to study to be a minister of the church, but it didn't really go with that one. It didn't really work. So he transferred down to Edinburgh, and he joined the Edinburgh Medical School. He's a contemporary of Robert Burns. Robert Burns wrote about him. Robert Burns wrote about him saying he remembers, or he's well known, Tytler was well known, and so he was a contemporary of Robert Burns. Robert Burns wrote about him, And he says that he was a man that would run around town with squeaky shoes, a skylight hat meaning like he had no top to his hat, and breeches that he just couldn't believe. So he went to pub around in big bloomers. He was never very good with money, and he was bailed out a few times. He actually ended up living in Sanctuary House at Holyrood. The Sanctuary House was one of the debtors' houses. So if you remember, Charles Dickens' father lived in a debtors' house. So did James Tytler. He had him and his wife, because he was so much in debt. They were pursued him, and he actually ended up crossing over the border to get away from the Scottish jurisdiction. So he went to live in Berwick for a while, Berwick across the English border. He was then attracted back to Edinburgh. He was given the job. He was very well read and very well written, and he was very educated, and he got the job of writing for the second edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. Now, some of you might know that Encyclopaedia Britannica was actually published here in Edinburgh. I think it's now owned by an American company and published in the States, but it started its life off here in Edinburgh. So he got a job doing this, and he made some money, but money would go through his hands. He could not hold, it'd be like trying to pick up water. He could not hold on to money. He was a very much caught up in the radical politics of the period, similarly to Robert Burns. And Tytler would start writing pamphlets. He referred to the House of Commons down in London as a junta of rogues, of ne'er-do-wells. But he made the mistake of actually naming people. So when he was naming the people, he could be done for libel. And so the authorities come after him again. However, when he started to make his money, he had these great ideas, but he just couldn't hold on to anything. And one of the ideas was that he had heard of the balloonists in France who would build the big balloons, and they were going up there. And so he actually started to build a balloon. And he was stitching it together, and he advertised it in the newspaper. People would come and see this balloon getting inflated. And of course, the first day he did it, it didn't work very well because there was very high winds and the whole thing got blown over. Second attempt, it picked up a little bit, but the basket got smashed. So of course he was losing all this. Everything he tried kind of went wrong for Mr. Tytler. And on the third attempt, it worked, and he became the first Scotsman to actually take flight. Go back to his literary works, though. One of his literary works, and I'm going to have to read this out here. That he wrote under a pseudonym, and his pseudonym was Ranger. He called himself Ranger, Mr. Ranger. And he wrote the book, which is still published, still in the National Library of Scotland in Edinburgh. And the book is entitled Ranger's Impartial List of Ladies of Pleasure in Edinburgh. So he wrote the book about 66 women, and he gave them all the characteristics about all these ladies of pleasure that you could visit in the brothels of Edinburgh, because it was not illegal then, and so there were pleasure houses here. And so he actually wrote the first book, and it was almost like a who's who and a what's what. And there was some of the remarks he made about some of the women were completely derogatory.
Like defiling the shores of India.
Defiling the shores of India, yeah. And you know, it's just, what a character. Now, he lived here. Now, he ended up, so he had two women. His first wife left him, and he then moved to Duddingston, and he moved in with a washerwoman here. And it said that he was doing his writings on the upturned wash tub, and he was living with this woman, and he apparently got married to this woman. And then the first wife found out about this, so the first wife then went to court and said he's a bigamist, and of course he was going to be arrested for bigamy. So him and the second wife up sticks, put all the stuff together, go over to Glasgow, they got on a boat, and they ended up in Salem, in Massachusetts. And that's the last we heard of Mr. James Tytler. But I think, what a character, living in this tiny little village. He was so well known, or as we say in Scots, he was a well-kent face. He was well known for his pamphleteering, his politicking, his balloonism, he got up in the balloon, his bigamy. I had so many titles that I just thought, I cannot let this character go past. Absolutely wonderful character.
I believe you wrote some pipe music as well, bagpipe music.
He was a folklorist as well. He would take some of the stories. And when he went over to the States, him and his wife living in Scottish communities or Gaelic communities or Celtic communities would actually add on to the stories that they taken over to the United
Like
States.
the Pinkertons, same sort of thing. in
Yeah,
a way. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
But
like,
he would have been on the wrong side of the Pinkerton. I don't think the Pinkertons would have queued up to get associated with them. But the last thing I'm going to show you here is this little house here. And I mentioned the royal connections. And we haven't really gone into a lot about the Jacobites. But suffice to say that the Jacobite army of 1745 and 1745 uprising was led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, and he landed up north, rallied the clans and the troops, advanced down here. Now, Edinburgh was still occupied, so it was still under the British government occupation. However, Charlie brought his troops here. The troops were based over on the hills here, and some not in the city of Edinburgh, because Edinburgh was still had walls around it, still a protected town. But Charles Edward Stuart set up his house here, and this is in September 1945. He established this as his war rooms. So he had his council of war in here before it into battle at the Battle of Prestonpans. Prestonpans, the British army was led by Johnny Cope. Do you remember that song you used to get in school, Mike?
hey Johnny Cope,
Hey
are you
Johnny
walking
Cope,
yet?
hey Johnny Cope, are you
Yeah.
walking yet? Are your drums are beating
Beating
yet?
yet.
If you were walking, I would wait till you gang to the coals in the morning. So that's it. Johnny Cope was the leader of the British army, or government army, and Charles Stuart's here. And this is why I think if the Charles Edward Stuart was here, then it's only a short walk to Sheephead. So I'm making the assumption that Charles Edward Stuart and his entourage also went to the pub. So I'm giving it that credit. I don't know if it's true, but I'm just thinking he would want to go and see there, buy everybody a round of drink before the Battle of Prestonpans.
Do you not think they were part of the Templars movement?
No, was he?
No, sorry, I'm just.
Oh, well, that blows that theory then. Well, they would have gone to take some of the fine meat that had been done
Yeah, yeah.
there as well.
Right.
So I'm going to say thanks again for joining us for the little tour. It's a tiny, I mean, it's literally a one street, but the history that can be extracted from this place, the connections to it. So we're talking about Walter Scott, Robert Louis Stevenson, Jane Barry also is connected with the pub there. We've got royal connections, so we've got the Mary, we've got James VI, we've got Charles Edward Stuart here, so Bonnie Prince Charlie. We're going back to David I for the church, and we've got David II as well, who would be around when the pub was built. We've gone back to the ancient Celts, 4,000 year old Bronze Age materials found here. We've got the rules of curling. We've got great artists, and it's all within half a mile, or 1/2 square mile, a half a kilometre, one square kilometre. So I hope you enjoyed it.